Dear friend, today we are going to talk on infrastructure. As you know, this is the part of the first session of course MSD 016, Strategies and Models for Sustainability. In this session, we shall touch upon definition, classification and characteristic of infrastructure and how to develop infrastructure in terms of that process, approach and a quick look into the concept of sustainability to infrastructure development. It is well known understanding that infrastructure is essential for increasing economic progress and reducing the poverty. The infrastructure is one of the key components in economic growth. And in the process of that, we know that when you develop the infrastructure for economic growth, giving service to the society, that have in one side sometime that have environmental impact or in the process of development it have positive environmental impact sometime. On the other hand, sometimes it have a threats to environment and sustainability. So we need to be very careful in developing the infrastructure. In the same way, when we are talking about, because when we develop the infrastructure and we develop the infrastructure with some objectives, with some target, so to try to achieve the target, sometimes we are not able to achieve the target. And so when we have insufficient infrastructure achievement, or if not able to achieve those targets of developing infrastructure that have a negative impact to the society, to the environment. So in sum, what we are saying is that infrastructure is a matter of choice, and it have matters in every aspect. So infrastructure choices matter for what? For economic growth, poverty reduction, and environmental sustainability. So you will see that a strong relationship between this infrastructure and growth. But that doesn't mean that more infrastructure always means more growth. In the same way, more growth does not necessarily require more infrastructure, right? For example, if you look into any of the infrastructure development, say our simple understanding of infrastructure is developing or establishing factories or industries at different level. So when you establish the industry or a small scale factory, then if you do not taken care of pollution control measure in the sense that if it is without adequate pollution control measures, then it will have impact on the emission from those industries. It may be power plants or factories, even from small scale that diesel industries, generators, from small scale industry that have negative impact on local air quality. When we have local air, there is impact on local air quality in simple way, air pollution, then that will lead to adverse effect on human health. That on the other hand, it also had adverse effect on the natural environment, surrounding natural environment. So we need to improve the infrastructure at both large and small by keeping all that limitation, and it also provide the basic objective of infrastructure is, as you know, it has a significant economic development benefit. For example, if you are giving limited electricity for lighting, access of limited electricity in lighting to vulnerable group of the people, poor people, or some group of the people, then that have a profound livelihood benefits, right? In the same way, if we have proper infrastructure in transportation, means transportation infrastructure improvement. If we have improved that transportation infrastructure, then it can lower the cost of production and improve market access. Simply we can say with better transportation infrastructure, then that will bring that availability, accessibility and affordability equation. The same way, if we have improved surface water management infrastructure, it can help in mitigate costly shortages of water. At the same time, we know that there is direct effect of this improvement as economic improvement. And it can also, and when we have economic improvement, that has also direct link to your sustainable development, right? We know that slow progress in expanding the availability of infrastructure has a significant effect on household, particularly on the poorer group of the people. And especially if you look in the global context, this is very common in poor countries, underdeveloped countries. Because if you look into that, if there is deficit in infrastructure, it affects the productivity and even among the farms, their ability to compete is also affected. So, infrastructure is the physical framework of facility through which goods and services are provided to the public. So, that includes, as you know, wide spectrum of services such as transportation, that may be roadways, railways, airways, water transportation, and power generation, its transmission and distribution, communication like telecommunication, and port handling facilities. When we talk about water supply, that water supply system, sewage disposal system, medical, educational, irrigation, and many more primary services. So these services have a direct impact on the working of, especially when we talk about economic growth in the business enterprises. And in others, in some of these, few are more important from a societal point of view, like educational, irrigation, and other, right? So we can define infrastructure is the physical framework of facilities which were the finiteness of resources. Just note down the finiteness of resources in a plan for including the coming generation that needs along with the present in such a way that the goods and services provided to the public now have a positive environmental impact in the long run. If we look into the different dictionary, for example, in Collins Dictionary, define infrastructure of a region, of a society, of organization consists of the basic facilities such as transport, communication, power supply, and building, which enable it to function. That country, that region. The same way, Cambridge Dictionary is also giving that definition of infrastructure is the basic system and services that a country or organization uses in order to work effectively, like such as transport and power supply. Then, what are the classifications? How we have to classify the infrastructure? It can be of hard infrastructure and a soft infrastructure. Hard infrastructure that refers to the large physical network necessary for the functioning of especially for a modern industrial nation. In case of soft infrastructure, it refers to all institutions which are required to maintain the economic, health, cultural and social standard of a country. This includes your financial system, educational system, healthcare system, the system of government and law enforcement, as well as nowadays very important is emergency services. These are soft infrastructure. Hard infrastructure can be further looked into transportation, energy, water management, communication, waste management, art monitoring management categories. The same way, soft infrastructure can be of institutional, industrial, social, and cultural. When you talk about types of hard infrastructure, as we mentioned, when you talk about that transportation is a hard infrastructure. It's about transportation on land, on water, in the air, and its inter-allied and associated infrastructure. Then, when we talk about energy infrastructure, this is the infrastructure required for producing electricity from water, steam, windmills, and many more, which gives energy, like alternate energy resources, equipments, biofuel clarifiers, and LPG. In the same way, petroleum pipelines, which we are talking about energy, storage distribution terminal, when all this system, oil wells, refineries, fleets of tanker ships and trucks, and coal mines, specialized facilities for storing and transporting coal. When we talk about water management infrastructure, it is about first is drinking water. That includes drainage system, right? Then irrigation, major irrigation system like reservoir, irrigation canals. Then flood control system like dikes, levees, major pumping station and floodgates. The one of the important that hard infrastructure is communication infrastructure, beginning from your postal service, telephone, mobile phone, television, radio transmission station, internet backbone, communication satellite, undersea cable, military communication services, then power line cable communication network, and many more, which is related to communication, telecommunication. Then another category of that hard infrastructure is, in the process of developing the infrastructure, or when we utilize resources, then we produce waste. So waste management is one of the important infrastructure, like municipal garbage and recyclable collection, solid waste landfills, solid waste incinerators, material recovery facilities, hazardous waste disposal facilities. In the same way, when we are talking about infrastructure, we need to understand different natural condition, including weather and so on. So, and this natural disaster and so on. So, this Earth monitoring measurement and measurement network is also one of the important infrastructure that includes meteorological monitoring network, tidal monitoring network, stream gauge or pluviometric monitoring network, seismometer network, remote sensing satellite, geodetic benchmark, and GPS means global positioning system. The second category of infrastructure is the soft infrastructure that include your even physical assets such as highly specialized building and equipment, as well as non-physical system like body of that rules and regulation governing the various systems, that is institution, then financing of all this system, as well as the system or organization by which highly skilled and specialized professionals are trained, they are advanced in their career, and so on. So it can be further classified into institutional infrastructure that includes financial system like banking system, exchanges, money supply, financial regulation, then government laws enforcement, political, legislative, justice and penal system, including police, fire protection, ambulances. So in case of industrial infrastructure and including the manufacturing infrastructure, mining and processing plants, and if you further look into industrial infrastructure, agriculture is also part of industrial infrastructure, forestry and fisheries infrastructure, livestock transportation, storage facilities, and firefighting in the others. Then, one of the important soft infrastructure is social infrastructure. That includes healthcare system, educational and research system, and social welfare system. When we talk about healthcare system, it's about hospitals, doctors, it's manpower, medical professional, then mechanism of that health monitoring and regulation system, emergency epidemic handling system. In the same way, when you talk about education and research system, it's about including your primary, secondary, elementary, and higher education system, specialized institutions, and so on. Right. The same way, social welfare system for poor, distressed, or victim of abuse. So another is cultural, sports, and recreational infrastructure is very much important. So when you talk about sports and recreational infrastructure, that includes parks, sports facilities, and system of sports leagues and associations. The same way, cultural infrastructure in modern world like concert hall, museums, libraries, theaters, studios, and specialized training facilities. So then we talk about recreational infrastructure, business, travel, and tourism is also one of the important infrastructure, including your both man-made and natural attractions, convention centers, hotels, restaurants, and other services that cater mainly to tourists, and business travelers, as well as the system for informing and attracting tourist travel insurance, etc. Then what are the major characteristics of infrastructure? That can be looked into two important characteristics. One is general characteristic, other is economic characteristic. We know that a good infrastructure in the form of improved transport, it can increase the productivity of workers through better management of time spent by them on non-productive activities. That means we need to improve that road transport, whatever the available transport system. This is one of the example of general characteristic of this infrastructure. In the same way, when you have improvements in water supply and sanitation, it also can have positive impact on the health of the worker, thereby increasing their productivity. So the point is that when we have a better infrastructure in various forms, it also helps especially the poor people, if you take an example, by earning more for their livelihoods and thus leading to reduction in what we are talking about, that poverty, inequality. Sometimes that all this is uncontrollable parameter of the disparity between the pace of growth in urban infrastructure and that of rural infrastructure. And most of the many infrastructure, whatever the characteristic we are looking, sometimes they are not use-specific or user-specific. They may be used simultaneously if you have sufficient capacities available, or sequentially if there is crowding or congestion. So in the same way, when you look into the infrastructure, you can have you can see general characteristic of infrastructure. If you look from the sustainability point of view, that some infrastructure in the process of development or in different processes, and then you will see some are positive environmental impact, others are negative environmental impact. In case of positive environmental, let us take an example of sewage water use for irrigation. If your infrastructure is producing sewage water and we can use those sewage water that is out of your infrastructure, that development process, if it produces, for example, from an industry that produces sewage water, that if we use for irrigation purpose after being treated, that is a positive environmental impact. And for example, we reclaim the landfill sites, wetland that used for sewage treatment. That can be later redeveloped as recreational parks. In the same way, duck ponds are used to treat the waste with the treatment, and this duck waste is a high source of high quantity protein feedstock for animals. In the same way, when that wastewater treatment, you will see extraction of methane can be done. We can extract the methane from that sewage treatment plant. That can be used for fuel, right? So in the same way, there are some certain negative environmental effects of infrastructure. For example, you have what example we are getting in positive impact on environment, that environmental impact like sewage treatment plant. If those sewage treatment plant, if we have underinvestment in that particular sewerage related to that water supply, then that have an harmful impact on us, especially the contamination of water reservoirs, then that will bring exacerbated flooding and sometimes reduce the health benefits from the investment on water. Right? So, the same way, if we poorly manage the solid waste and if we inappropriately dispose the solid waste, then that have complicated the disposal of wastewater, and that will bring those unmanaged drainage system in the urban street. They will have negative health hazard. That will have health hazard to us. Another, if you look the economic characteristic of that infrastructure, as we know that the most general economic characteristic of this modern infrastructure are the supply of services through a network delivery system designed to serve a multitude of users. For example, if you look into that pipe water, electric power, telecommunications, sewerage, rail service. But if you look into this delivery system, and every delivery system has their dedicated purpose. For example, you cannot use water pipes for any other purpose except this carrying this water. So we invest in that particular infrastructure, right? So this kind of investment in such a dedicated delivery system, that is in economic term called as a sunk cost. So this sunk cost may not be converted in other uses, right? In the same way, another economic characteristic is natural monopoly situation. In natural monopoly situation, you will see there are a number of scope for competition of supply with infrastructure across different sectors or within the sectors and between different technology. So because of that, many infrastructure facilities are characterized by declining cost that leads to that what the phenomenon that known as natural monopoly situation. And when we look into natural monopoly situation, we sometimes feel that it is because of policy decision. In fact, it is not because of policy decision, it is because of technological factors, right? So in most urban areas, one example is that the new infrastructure like rapid road transport over the footbridges and good communication infrastructure as the acceptance for technology, because it is faster in this geographical location. So you will see all these examples. So in the same time, so when a supply of infrastructure find very less demand, especially in the beginning, the pure that public goods would lead to failure of the market. Since use cannot be monitored in case of public goods, no price can be charged for the goods, and no private individual will be willing to provide such goods. Not in the case of this is not in the case of private and public sector participate in infrastructure building. For example, in case of Indian Railway, it has been constructed by the government, but most of the services that are required for maintaining the operation of railways come from private sector, as private sector is the biggest beneficiary of this railroad infrastructure. So thus, infrastructure service are characteristic of both public and private goods. Another economic characteristic is zero marginal cost or no rise in marginal cost. So for providing benefits of public goods infrastructure to an additional consumer, we do not need invest additional extra expenses to that. For example, any number of new users for the water from the dam can be added, but it will not cost another additional expenses. So this is one of the infrastructure, because once infrastructure is completed, its contribution is in terms of the service provided by its users. Then we need to understand how infrastructure are developed. So infrastructure development is defined or may be defined as development or creation of an asset with a large scale potential and a large scale reach of benefits that have impact on the economy, geography, demography, and financial well-being of chosen location for development. And it is happening globally in four basic project management mode. One is project mode, second one is phase mode, third one is parallel mode, fourth one is plunge mode. And sometimes combination any of these four modes. In case of project mode, that construction of railroad construction from a location X to Y, which was not existed, and we used to do in that project mode. It has to be completed. So then the second is that in this, we will see construction. This construction consider the complete picture. You understand the complete picture from X to Y, X location to Y location. And what are the next step also? That is project one. The phase mode is, for example, the construction of dams and other mammoth structure like seaport, because it happens in phases or stages from project inception till it's finished. The third one is parallel mode, that especially in ICT and telecommunication infrastructure, They are constructed parallelly by public sector also, private sector also, other, hybrid mode also. For example, BSNL also have that telecommunication facility, other private sector like Reliance Jio, Idea, Vodafone, Airtel, and so on. So these are. Then in case of plunge mode, the government of any nation, they decide to work in a large scale. Like, we have Golden Quadrilateral and TAS Corridor X project, and that kind of nation that we are looking for, Act East policy, and all these are some of the plunge mode. Then how can we look the development process of that infrastructure development process? So it can be look in altering mode, expanding mode, abandonment mode, this abandonment mode, and archiving mode. In this altering mode, what we did, we remove a normal, and example is we used to remove a normal annually renewable stone road and replace the same with cement road. And another example is we remove existing cable telecommunication with new fiber optic cable because of the increase in or improving technology. In expanding mode, what we did, we increased the reach, capacity, or quality and quantity of an existing infrastructure, like railroad infrastructure that keeps growing on. Then in abandonment mode, we completely discard the existing infrastructure and adopt any of altering mode and expanding mode of infrastructure development approach. In case of archiving mode, all granaries and all buildings, they are no longer used, and hence we converted them into tourist attraction, and it's called archiving mode. Like we are talking about that heritage building and so on. So the point is that infrastructure development is a way of slowly adding value to a civilization as we know that. And some of the approaches used for infrastructure development is we need to understand that when we plan a new infrastructure, it should be based on the emergent needs. This is one of the most popular approach. There also happen to be very important deciding factor that call geographic and demographic proximity of input resources. So the first, the important is we need to understand the emergent needs of that particular place or particular demographic situation. So if you looked into many intervention on the infrastructure development roadmap, they are for overcoming the existing skews and avoiding the new skews in the development of infrastructure. So it is very necessary. One of the very necessary approach is the dating of the existing infrastructure and assessing obsolescence so that they may be renewed for longevity. Then what about sustainability to development of infrastructure? A number of literature you will find out based on the research studies that have been undertaken during the last few decades, and that looks into the aspect of infrastructure and its effect on the development, and they try to estimate the productivity of infrastructure investment. Then while some of the group, they try to attempt to find a nexus between growth and investment on infrastructure. So in that, they found that there is a strong correlation that exists between that per capita GDP and availability of certain services such as that infrastructure such as telecommunication, power, roads, and access to safe drinking water. And on the other hand, they also found that with the rise in per capita GDP, composition of infrastructure changes significantly. So as the economy progresses, the share of agricultural infrastructure shrink in one side. This is very important, we should understand. And other infrastructure takes their place for speedy growth of industrial and services sector. That is happening in our country also, we have to understand. So when we develop infrastructure, we need to understand the sustainability approach of infrastructure development. That should consider reaching all the community irrespective of urban and rural pockets That is the principle of equity and equality. And we have to follow or consider the optimal utilization of resources, that efficiency, resource efficiency. We have to consider the development of infrastructure resource useful for the present and the future generation. That talks about long-term vision of that infrastructure. If we plan for new infrastructure creation, that should be based on all the existing infrastructure in all possible sectors. And we should plan for enhancing existing infrastructure based on availability of the resources. We should provide infrastructure that are also based on need assessment of the user part from the perceived needs. That is, this point is very important. Infrastructure should be preserved if they can narrate history for many generations, like heritage monuments and tourism sites. It should be planned collectively across all categories so as to avoid redundancy and consider co-implementation. We know that infrastructure may be built for many generations, but it has to be overlapping many sectors so as to avoid wastage and abundancy. So there are four basic approaches to the development of infrastructure, basically based on the principle of sustainability. First approach is new infrastructure based on the understanding of finiteness of all consumable for the construction. That is, resource efficiency has to be looked in, and we have to look the limitation of resources. Second is geographic and demographic proximity of input resources involved in the construction and creation of any infrastructure. That's to be understood. Then the third approach is we should overcome the existing skews and avoid the new skews in development of infrastructure based on the urban-rural divide. Means equality should be there. Then the fourth approach should be dating the existing infrastructure and assessing obsolescence, and also needs to be prioritized new infrastructure development based on that necessity and luxury over a time period. Then, when we look that infrastructure from the lens of sustainable development goal, you will find out that we have sustainable development 17 SDGs, and infrastructure is part of SDG 9. But it is recognized to have much wider sustainable development benefit. And SDG 9 focus on industry innovation infrastructure, as you know. So in 17 goals, you will find out that this infrastructure directly or indirectly influences to most of the 17 goals, which include 121 of the 169 targets, means 72% of the target influences by that's goal number 9 that talks about industry innovation infrastructure. For example, 5 of the 17 SDGs goal, like when you talk about good health and well-being, that talks about what we are talking about, different characteristics of that infrastructure that is directly related to your infrastructure, that healthcare system and better environment. Clean water and sanitation, SDG goal 6, right? That needs infrastructure of water, good water management practice, good water management system, then affordable and clean energy. And SDG 9, it is a major goals that talks about industry innovation infrastructure. Sustainable cities and communities, that is also about infrastructures. So all of the targets, they are influenced by infrastructure, whereas if you look into 15 of the SDG, more than half of the targets are influenced by this infrastructure. Say an example, the water energy infrastructure sectors have the largest direct influence on individual. If we badly plan infrastructure, the another point we have to understand from the SDGs is that if we badly plan the infrastructure, if we do not properly plan, it has a potential threat to other SDGs. For example, if we have badly planned the infrastructure, it will have an impact on people's health. For example, SDGs. If we have SDGs 3, if there is the negative impact because of that improper planning, then air pollution will be there, water soil contamination will be there, disease will be there. That have impact on SDG 3. Same way, that has direct impact into SDG 14, life below water, SDG 15, life on land, and that destroys your new infrastructure like sustainable cities and communities. So, in the same way, we know that there are a number of infrastructure that exceed the carbon budget agreed in the Paris Agreement. That's about SDG 13, climate action. So, if we abandon all these things and if we repurpose before the end of its life, it has a direct impact to the threats to achieving SDG 13. So, the point is today, what we have discussed is what are the definition, characteristic, types, and the process of infrastructure, how it has to be developed, different modes, and we also try to understand the importance of that infrastructure in achieving sustainable development goals. So, dear friends, these are some of the references. It may be useful for you further reading also, and I also depend on these two references for this presentation. Thank you all. Thank you very much.